So I'm sitting here on the sidewalk right outside 517 Walnut, and if you look down, embedded in the ground is a horse hitching ring, which is older than 100 years. And as interesting and historic as this is, the real history is inside. We'll go there in just a minute. I'm Chris Epting. I'm a writer and a storyteller, the author of several books and many articles about Huntington Beach. And what I like best is uncovering history that you may not be familiar with. This is Hidden Huntington Beach. There's nothing like 517 Walnut Avenue. The antique store, along with the adjoining house, represents true Huntington Beach history. The former furniture company and home of the Helm family goes back almost 120 years. Today, Susie Worthy, the great-granddaughter of Matthew Helm, one of the city's pioneers, lives on the property with her husband Guy Gazzardo. Together, they run the antique store and live in the residence. For years, Guy has been doing all of the painstaking refurbishment work to help restore the buildings. The couple gave me an inside look at their interesting world. Stepping through that door is like walking back in time, and I couldn't wait to meet with them. So Susie and Guy, I mean, everybody who comes into your antique store, I think, is blown away by the artifacts, the collectibles, but they don't always know the history, especially of your family, Susie. How do you describe, or would you describe, kind of in a nutshell, your historic family tree here in Huntington Beach?
Well,
it's a whole episode unto itself,
yes.
But give it a shot.
Okay. My great-grandfather, when he arrived here in 1903, attained a partner, and they started a business together.
Your great-grandfather was?
Matthew Elmer Helm. The business was called Holman and Helm House Furnishing Company. And so the partner actually had to sell his portion of their partnership, and then he started his own store, M.E. Helm House Furnishing Company.
Which is where we are now?
Which is where we are now.
This very building right now.
This very building right now.
There's a famous lifeguard in your family, right? Tell me about him.
Well, the lifeguard that you're asking about is my grandmother's brother, John Paul Helm. And he was an exceptional athlete, and so he was basically hired to be the first lifeguard.
He was the first city lifeguard, paid city lifeguard in Huntington Beach. There might have been some other people that were diving and saving lives before that.
He was the first official.
But he was the first official city lifeguard in Huntington Beach.
About when would that have been?
I believe it was 1916.
Wow.
Yeah, he was right out of high school, right at that time.
So they were in the process of building the plunge at that particular time.
The saltwater plunge.
The saltwater plunge. So he was that lifeguard for the saltwater plunge.
Wow. Now talk about your dad a little bit, because he has a great legacy in town as well. You've got great old photos of your dad. Very athletic in high school, right? Went to Huntington Beach High School?
Yes, he did. He went to Huntington Beach High School. He extremely athletic. He was excellent at tennis. He was excellent at basketball, and he just excelled at everything, which is why he went into recreation and parks. I would say his biggest legacy has to do with the recreation and parks division. He was instrumental in getting a $6 million bond that the citizens of Huntington Beach had to vote on in the 1970s, which would secure open space land to create so that he could buy and make parks out of them. And during his time that he worked in the city for 33 years, he created 57 parks. And the main big one was Central Park.
That's
over there on Golden West and Talbert, on both sides.
Right.
So that was his big baby, and he won an award for that. National award, and it was a award for the World's Fair.
He beat the Seattle
World's Fair in the 70s for our Central Park here in Huntington Beach.
Wow. Now, how long have you run this as an antique store about?
We've been running this store since July of 2003. So 17 years now. We just passed our 17th year.
I think it's incredible that you've got the family legacy here, but that that you live in the Helm House, which we're going to go out and take a walk around and look at that in just a minute. But the fact that you operate this business here with all this family history here, I think is really special for people. Why don't we go outside? Because again, part of the story is in here, but there's also a story outside because of work that, Guy, you've been doing on the Helm House, on this building. So why don't we go out now and wander around a little? And there's also a famous plant out there that we need to visit as well. So can we do that?
Yeah.
All right, I will lead the way. Let's go. So you live in the Helm House. The house, I mean, next to the Newland House, it's probably the most recognized, well-known historic house in Huntington Beach. How long have you lived here, Susie?
Well, I actually lived here when I was first born. And then my family built a new house over on 13th and Crest. And that would have been in 1960. So then I moved over there. And then when I came back when I was about 23.
Susie, you've lived here since the 1980s. What's it like to live in a house where you've got all this generational history?
It's just a special type of feeling that I'm in something that belonged to my dad's childhood home and my great-grandparents and my grandparents. It's just, there's something that's just special about it. You know, it gives me inspiration.
So, Guy, this is one of the most talked about historic houses in Huntington Beach, obviously. From a restoration process, you've been doing most of the work. What's it like? What can you tell us about the status of the building today? What's next? What it took to get here? Give us an overview of the work you've done on the house.
This house, when I started on it, it was a complete wreck, and it was actually on the ground. There was no real foundation, because this house was brought over here in pieces from Santa Ana and then assembled here, and it was just on these little blocks.
What year did it come over from Santa Ana?
Probably about 1903 approximately. Wow. So when we decided to actually restore it, and I was not expecting this, we actually had to lift the entire house up off of that old crummy foundation, completely put in a good new foundation that was, you know, up to code and legally correct, and leveled the place out because pieces were falling. One section was down, one piece was up. When I work on this house, and there's just a very rewarding feeling to know that you're involved in saving a piece of history that almost was gone. And it's been fun to try and replace things that somebody else had done that had got ruined, and to make it right. And I think, man, wouldn't it be great if somebody's looking down on this now and going, hey, he's finally figured it out. He got the nail in the right spot, stuff like that, you know. Anyway, I really enjoy it. I feel very fortunate to be able to work on it. And I'm glad I have the skills to do it. I feel like that's something that was built up over my lifetime to be able to do something like this. And this was very important to my father-in-law. He really did not want to see anything happen to this house. He knew the history of it.
Well, almost as famous as the house is the Hydrangea Bush, which we're going to go check out right now, right?
Yeah.
Let's go. You're going to tell me about this over here.
Okay.
So, the most famous plant in Huntington Beach, arguably, the Hydrangea Bush. Talk about this. It's old, for one thing, right?
Yes.
About how old do you think it is?
Well, it's kind of interesting. We don't know exactly for sure, but I believe it was planted by my grandmother. Now, my grandmother and my grandfather got married right out of high school in 1916. And they purchased the property from her parents in 1919. So this, I think it was her opportunity to change the house and the yard
Make it her
the way
own.
she wanted it. Yes.
But you've got a photo of your dad in front of this exact bush, right? About when would that have been taken?
Well, he was born in 1924, so how old do you think he was in that picture?
Maybe 5 or 6.
Yeah, maybe 5 or 6. So,
What's the maintenance like? I mean, obviously, you've got to protect it because people were taking samples, right? To put it politely.
Yes.
And now you've got to protect it, but what's the
tempting.
maintenance like on it? Like what do you have to do to keep it like this?
Actually, it's really a pretty simple plant to take care of. Once a year after Thanksgiving, usually the weekend after, we come in and we completely take all the flowers, the leaves and everything off, and we trim it back so it looks like little sticks. And so there's people that walk by when we're doing this once a year, and they're always concerned that we're like ripping the plant out because, you know, they know all about the history of this plant. And my signs that are posted, you know, in order for everybody to enjoy this beautiful plant. That's why we put the sign out.
The signs are almost as famous as the plant now.
I know, the signs are great. So anyway, and here it's in its full glory.
Susie, there's an equally historic, if not as recognizable, plant that's here. Tell me about what's over my shoulder here next to the hydrangea.
That is a debutante camellia tree, and it blooms twice a year. Kind of peony, light pink peony looking flowers. Beautiful. It's
Has it
just
been here as
loaded,
long as the
too.
hydrangea?
Yes. In fact, when we were doing the foundation work, the people that were doing the foundation work were letting us know, well, I think we're going to have to take out those 2 plants. And I said, absolutely not. I said, you guys got to figure this out, but these have to remain. And so they ended up coming back and informing me once they started digging underneath the house that the roots were planted towards the sidewalk instead of spanning out the roots underneath the house.
Guy, why don't we go out back where you do some of your work out back? We can look at a little more of the restoration and maybe an artifact or two that you've procured over the years here in Huntington Beach. Can we do that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I'll lead the way if that's okay.
Okay, sounds good.
So we're here out back now, obviously. It's your own private world. It's also a really great chance to get a closer look at the restoration where you can kind of do a side-by-side comparison, right, Guy? I mean, we look over there, what do you see exactly? I mean, to the novice, to me it looks like you can see the old and the new right next to each other. Is that right?
That's all old, but there's a section where we restored it, and there's the unrestored part of it. So all of that wood there is original to the building. This part that sticks out on this side is a little bit later. The part on this side is older, is from the very beginning of the building.
Wow.
There's been changes on the back part over the years, but that part there is over 70 years old. The newest section is over 70 years old.
Wow. Well, you're holding a piece of what I think is true hidden Huntington Beach history, but before we get to it, just to kind of set the scene here, you owned and operated a really popular surf shop out on PCH. Talk about that for a minute, because people have fond memories of it.
It was called Wind and Sea Surfboards. It was right on 6th and PCH. It was in a building that was older that had been a service station. And we leased it and converted it into a surf shop. It was pretty fun. I had a great time there anyway. But it was originally owned by Tom Talbert, and it was called Talbert's Texaco. He was a guy, that was one of his businesses, was the gas station.
And his house was next to that as well.
His house was right next door, the Talbert house. It was originally owned by C.D. Hartwell. It was equally as old as our property here, maybe even a year or two older. It was from the days of Pacific City when there was no Huntington Beach.
All right, now on that note, speaking of Pacific City, which is pre-1904, what you're holding is interesting because when the Talbert House came down, you were able to go in there and salvage a couple of pieces here and there, right?
Yes. The city actually owned the property at the time, and they wanted to get the house gone. So the city administrator at that time, Paul Cook, gave me permission to go in there. He knew I was fixing this place up. He goes, Guy, go ahead and go in there, take anything you want. Take doors, doorknobs, whatever you feel like you need. Well, as I'm walking through the house, all the interior walls in the house were made out of this stuff.
So this was on the wall. This was part of the wall.
A wall inside of the Talbert house. It was a 1.5-story house, so this was part of an area that went into a roof area that went down. So that's why it's cut like that on the top. But yeah, this was in the wall on the second floor. And this one, I couldn't believe it. It says right on it, written on this piece of wood in crayon, Pacific City. And that had survived from that time period on that house.
I can read it. It says Pacific City. So what do you think the story is?
I'm assuming that all the lumber and the parts, the materials to build the house were brought down here from probably up in the Long Beach area or somewhere. And this was possibly on the top of the stack of wood.
Just to identify
as
where
a
it was going?
destination to where it was going. And the guy who was the carpenter probably thought, I'm putting this on here, because this was a historic moment. There was no houses here. I mean, there was nothing. There was really barely a Pacific City. So this is one of the very first residences that was in the city. And so it had that Pacific City thing on it.
So when it was in the house, you could read that in the house? Like it was visible in the Talbert house?
It wasn't on the first floor in
Right.
the living room, okay? It was up the stairs.
Buried a little bit upstairs.
Kind of in the stairway landing. The stairway went up and it kind of turned and you went up to the top floor. So here it was on the second floor in the hallway. And
this is an incredible historic artifact. I mean, it really is. Just the fact that it's identified as a Pacific City artifact pre-Huntington Beach is really special.
I don't know where that will end up going someday, but just to be able to share that story with you and hopefully with some of the public, I think it's a great piece of history. And
Absolutely.
A lot of people don't know anything about Pacific City except what they're built new down there. But there was a Pacific City here before there was a Huntington Beach, and this is a piece of it. And I'm so proud to be able to have saved it at the last minute.
Good job. Well, thanks for sharing. I mean, not just your home, your shop, all the history, but this piece of Pacific City history is really special. That, again, this is true hidden. Well, it's not hidden Huntington Beach. It's hidden Pacific City. So we can bend the rules a little bit, but I think people are going to love seeing this. And again, just for having me back here, you've let me into this world that people on the outside I know are always so curious about. Now they have a little bit better idea of what's going on back here. More importantly, where you're taking it in the future.
Right.
And I think that's really important. So thank you so much. It was a long time planning, but we did it finally.
Yes, we did.
And I think, to your point earlier, Guy, there's a little bit too mature for one episode, so we'll have to come back. If you're watching, we've also got a Facebook group called Hidden Huntington Beach. We'll share maybe some more pieces and photos on there. But this has been really fun, so thank you both for having me, and thank you for joining us here as well.